Hello there and a warm welcome to your program, People's Imbizo, brought to you by African News Network. Thank you for joining us. Today we're coming to you from Tshwane University of Technology, and we will be talking about the regulation of social media. We're talking about fake news, and we'll also be talking about cyberbullying. Of course, you at home can join in the conversation. Let's make this a hashtag trend, hashtag People's Imbizo. Tell us what you think, and we'll be happy to engage you. Of course, I'm your host, Audrey Chimwanda. Thank you for joining us. I'll introduce to you my panel for today that will be helping us discuss this issue. Very important. We have students from TUT that are actually studying the media, and they'll be helping us in this conversation to see how we can map the way forward. To my right, I don't know if he needs any introduction, Mr. Kenny Kunene. He is, I don't know if I can say the owner, or you are responsible for Weekly Expose, aspiring media mogul as well. He'll be telling us a lot about that. We also have Sarah Findley, media monitoring, and we have Chamano Makadi from the TUT Broadcasting. He is a lecturer here and is also a member of SANIF for Education and Training. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Of course, we'll be talking to the students in just a few minutes. If they have any concerns, any contributions, they'll be welcome to join in. So the State Security Minister, Minister David Mahlow, I think a few weeks ago, made an announcement that the government is considering regulating social media. Of course, Twitter went into a frenzy. Everybody was thinking, no, wait a minute, this is crazy. How do you regulate social media? In fact, it is a step towards a state capture, or shall we call it a dictatorship. Can media be regulated?
Well, I must say, Audrey, I think it's a tough ask. Obviously, the minister, when he made such a suggestion, it follows on, I would say, legitimate concerns. A phenomenon that we have seen, obviously, not just here in South Africa, but something that is affecting the world at large. We've seen this trend, obviously, from the UK to the US, a lot of stories that are actually not true. And obviously, when they're reported on some of these channels, it's as if it is true. But most of these stories, you pick them on social media, particularly Facebook. But answering your question, can that be regulated? I think it's going to be a tough one, but let's look at the concerns that we have seen, especially from here in South Africa. Media practitioners are very skeptical. They're very worried. Could this be an attempt by government to try and have control over media, over what people have to say? So those concerns, I think they're legitimate, and I think it's a subject of further discussion. But I must say there has been calls from other, platforms. People are really worried about this. Maybe just a simple example of what happened earlier in the year during State of the Nation address. There were also suggestions that journalists must be given some kind of orders in terms of how they must do their work. And that on its own, I think it makes journalists or media people very worried. Right. So you cannot blame them for such concerns.
Sarah, can we authenticate the news that we see on social media? Because, we have to admit, most people are now they go to your Facebook, you go to your Twitter, instead of turning on to a news channel to find out what's happening in the world. But how do you authenticate the information that we see on social media? Is it even possible? Because one of the major concerns from the State Security Minister was that, look, we have a lot of this fake news that is going on, and it is shaping the minds of South Africans in a different way that is not actually true.
So one of the programs that we run at Media Monitoring Africa is around digital literacy and media literacy. And some of the big problems that we're facing is, like you say, people are not media literate. And so you come across a story and people immediately internalize it and believe it and spread it. And with WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter allow for such easy sharing, we get that spread of potentially fake content. So one of the big concerns is, or one of the big things that we can do is around making people aware of things to look out for in terms of fake news. So if you click on a link and there is a long really long URL, really long website name that doesn't seem to be linked to anything else, that's cause for concern. If they're citing people and they don't identify them, that's cause for concern. If it's just by one side of the argument, that's another thing. So there are multiple things to look out for in order to identify fake content. And our big drive at the moment is to get people more media and digitally savvy. Yeah.
Kenny, you are an aspiring media mogul. Talk to us about Weekly Exposé. I'm sure we've read a lot of stories about you, most of which I'm sure are not true, and some of them are very true. How sensitive is this topic? And as you're responsible for Weekly Exposé, what responsibility do you take to make sure that whatever content you have out there is not harmful and is true and is not fake news?
Thank you for having me. Let me start by responding to your first question. There's a need for regulation of social media. The fact that media monitoring is educating people about looking out for fake news, that's a cause for concern. Number two, the fact that there's another agency that seeks to investigate fake news and list the top 10 fake news sites every now and then on social networks tells you that it's a cause for concern, and it needs to be regulated. People's lives, families, their jobs, their businesses go down, people lose jobs because of the perception that is being created on social media. So it's very important. Big media houses are also now on social media platforms because that's the way the world is going. Print media is declining all over the world. Even here in South Africa, statistics can show you that. So the fact that print media has gone digital, and there's also digital new websites like Weekly Exposé that are only digital, tells you that you need to regulate it, because it is no longer just about entertainment. It's no longer about people sharing what they are doing. You know, when Twitter started, it was sort of a joke in South Africa because one will be in the toilet and take a picture and say, I'm in the toilet.
I think people still
One
do
will
that.
be cooking and say, I'm cooking. You know, so,
right.
but now...
But where do you draw the line between regulating social media to make sure that people that post content are responsible and, you know, infringing on people's privacy?
That's exactly what you need to do. You see, if you go to China and other Arab states, there's no Twitter. It's banned. You cannot access it. Facebook is banned in some other countries because they don't want to be dealing with these issues that we are raising now. But because we are a democracy, we need to make sure that even the right to freedom of speech and freedom of expression is responsible. But because people cannot be responsible by themselves, they need the law, they need regulation to assist them to be responsible. So in as far as Weekly Exposé is concerned, we started in January and we have grown by 300%. We have written stories about top people, top politicians, businessmen, world stories, African stories that involves governments. In fact, one government in Africa as we speak is going to the elections because of the stories that we exposed. So what I'm saying is we make sure that we verify our stories. We make sure that when people bring stories to us, we investigate them, we verify them, and if there's merit, we then give the person that we are going to write about. It doesn't matter if it's 100 people. We send them all questions so that they are aware that we are writing these stories. Remember, Weekly Exposé as an online newspaper is a start. Our plan is to have a newspaper, a hard copy, a print copy of Weekly Exposé. We are also looking at going ITV. So we cannot start by being fake news when we are going into platforms that require us to be very ethical. So we are not a blog that deals with opinion. We are a proper online newspaper. That is why we have ANA, Africa News Agency, which is now streaming news to us, everyday news. Reuters, Bloomberg, all of them. We stream news from them so that we can provide people, but we select those news because we don't want to be sued based on a story from an agency. So we are very much ethical. And my emphasis, I am not part of the editorial. I am a funder and the founder of Weekly Expose. However, when we started, my brief was simple. You have the freedom to write whatever you write. But let us make sure that we prove to South Africans that the media can be truthful, that media can be ethical, that media can be able to build instead of destroying.
Right, ultimately that'll be the, the goal, if media can actually build and not destroy. But that's not exactly what happens on the ground now, is it? Just to make sure that everyone understands, the floor is open. If you have any contributions, any questions, please go ahead. Just can we get a microphone here?
Hi everyone, this is Bruce Silakwang, and I have sort of like a comment that I want to say, and I think it's been circulating around any of the answers that are given. As much as we can talk about media regulation as a whole, the biggest problem, not really problem, the biggest comment I want to say that a lot of regulation deals with our altercation of our own freedom of expression. So I feel like if the media wants to decide to start, if the government wants to start deciding on what's what and what should be put on what, they should remember that our freedom of expression is only limited by the 3 clauses under the government constitution. So instead of us dealing with how we alter our manners and stuff, we should create tools that allow media houses, big houses, such as Weekly Expose and so forth, to sort of verify and highlight what's real and what's not real. Think of how Turn It In came up, and think of how people can be seen as, oh, okay, dude, you copied and pasted from Wikipedia. We can see that through a tool. So instead of us being stripped away or being sort of pried away from our rights, why don't we just create tools that allow us to see what's real and what's not real? That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Right, thank you for that contribution. Anyone else before I come back to the panel?
My name is Zweli Nkosi. On a point of exigency from you, Mr. Kenny, you said that because of media is now moving towards digital platforms, but I also heard you saying you want to at least at one day have the same copy, a raw copy, of a newspaper. So I'm contradicted, or I'm contravened of what are you trying to say? Because if you say media is moving digital, but you also you're saying media is moving digital, but you also want to have a raw copy of a newspaper. So I don't know what you mean there.
Right, a very valid question. Kennedy, would you like to respond to that? If we're going digital, then why are you investing in hard copy news?
Before we started this platform, we did a lot of research, and we have also looked at the decline of print media. South Africa, unfortunately, still has a high rate of unemployment and poverty, and there are millions of people who still don't have access to tablets. And then you need to reach such people. And for us, an investment in print media is not as huge as an investment in digital. But we also want to have a footprint in the print media. We also want to reach those guys in the townships who cannot afford a tablet, who cannot afford an iPad, who cannot afford a laptop. We also want to reach those people in the homelands who cannot afford such.
We're actually having this discussion with my colleagues even on Twitter to say every media house has an agenda. You know, an agenda that they want to push, whether it's a narrative that they want to push. How important is it to make sure that, you know, we don't have these narratives that are pushed by media houses, but we have just authentic news to make sure that, you know, the consumers of this news can make their own decisions? From SANEF, you're a member of SANEF, as editors, when you get together, do you have these conversations?
No, of course. I mean, we have these conversations all the time, but I think what is important is just to make sure that you play a fair game. I mean, and by that I mean stick to the principles of journalism. We always talk about objectivity. We talk about fairness. So it has to be a fair game. But
well, that's all very well on paper, but is that what is happening? Do you believe that media houses are pushing their own narratives and their own agendas?
Well, I guess, I mean, it's a subject of discussion. I mean, it can be interpreted differently. you will always have different views. You know, when you look at maybe just looking at the different media platforms we have in the country. People report differently. You can just take a particular subject and try to analyze how it was reported. But of course, it's always going to be different. But Audrey, very important before we continue. There's an interesting point that a young man raised here, which I think I just want us to go back to. Right. Perhaps it's an opportunity for media practitioners. Instead of getting worried about you know, fake news and thinking of regulating social media, maybe we need to think about it as an opportunity to say, what is it that we can do to try and counter this new phenomenon? Of course, I mean, if you work for a media house, one of the things that you can never compromise on is credibility, which comes with the responsibility in making sure that your stories are verified and all of that. So I'm trying to say, let's not rush and think that regulating social media is going to be the solution. Let's look at it and say, how best can we counter this?
Right, and those are the tools that, Sarah, you touched a bit on that, on how to educate people and on how to be able to identify, especially if there's a URL that doesn't, you know, seem to appear to be authentic. I mean, what else can we do? I think just to go back, I think there's a misunderstanding that social media is currently not regulated, and there are various laws and policies in place that regulate social media and the online space. So, for example, publications that subscribe to the Press Council and the Press Code fall under those regulations around what is expected of journalism and stories. And last year, the Press Code was amended to include online content supplied by media houses. So that's a form of regulation. PEPUDA, better known as the Equality Act, if there is an instance of hate speech somewhere online, you can use the Equality Act to seek justice for that instance and the of social hate media speech. Platforms themselves have that,
yes.
I don't know, you know, somewhere that you can report if you feel someone is bullying you on social media, be it Twitter or Facebook and Instagram. But how is that different from what Minister Mahlobo was talking about? If we have this regulation that we have already, what step further is he looking at, would you think?
So he's seeking a much broader regulation in terms of government essentially sitting and sifting through content and determining what should be allowed online and what shouldn't be. And for us, that raises ethical issues that have already been brought up in terms of freedom of expression. But it's also incredibly problematic in terms of the practicality, just the volume of content that is uploaded every day. Me sharing a picture of my dog on Facebook with my friends, or a family member sharing on a WhatsApp group. How could you ever possibly begin to regulate that? And infringement of privacy has already been brought up. Right. And so his suggestion is incredibly broad. I
think the whole idea of wanting to regulate social media, it raises more questions actually than answers. And I'm not disputing the fact that there's been a lot of things going on, which obviously, I mean, those concerns are genuine. But you cannot have a country where, and I'm not saying that is where we're going, but that's where the concern is. We cannot have a country where people are sort of channeled on what to say and not what to say. You see, and that's where the concern is.
Right, and we spoke about, you know, having tools. I want to go back to the audience and see if anyone has any contribution. It's very important that you take part in this and participate. I mean, you guys are the young guys who know what's happening on social media and how we can find tools to make sure we're identifying fake news. Anyone wants to contribute to anything?
All right. Good day once again to the panel. My name is Puleli Chwiti and I'm from Cube Media. Firstly, I'd like to say we should recognize today as it's Black Wednesday, the day when three newspapers, 3 journalists and a couple of activists were banned during the apartheid era, all right? And then my question to the panel is that the day Pravin Pt-1 was fired, he maliciously attacked the ANN7, and he stated that the ANN7 are the people that are perpetuating false news on social media. Now, my question is, how then do the ANN7 use the press ombudsman to protect them from anyone who has such agendas or malicious allegations towards the media hub? Thank you.
And the gentleman raises a very, important point. The rights that are enshrined in our Constitution, the people that have died to make sure we have freedom of expression, and how it is important for us to actually protect this. He raised a very important point. The Finance Minister, ex-Finance Minister now, Mr. Pt-1 Gordhan, seems to have an issue with the African News Network. In fact, he said there's a lot of untruths that were said about him. What recourse does it then take? And I'm posing this question to you, Chairman, because you're part of SANEF. What needs to happen going forward? What is the recourse you take?
No, look, I think, I don't want to say it's a difficult question, but I think we just need to be clear about this, to say, let's not make it political.
No, it's not political. I think the gentleman is asking what recourse one takes if they feel that they have been attacked. Is there an ombudsman that one goes to? Okay, never mind, it's the ex-Finance Minister, Pt-1 Gordhan. Let's just say it's anyone who has a problem with any media house that they feel that is perhaps attacking them, or if the media house thinks this certain person is labeling them as being unethical. What needs to happen?
Point, I mean, there's absolutely no doubt. I mean, if you're talking about broadcasting, for example, we do have BCCSA, where somebody, if is not happy about certain issues or how the story has been reported, they can always take up those issues with BCCSA. In the case of print media and online, you have the Press Council of South Africa, which is always there to tackle some of these issues through their their adjudication committee led by a very good judge, Judge Mwepe, who has been in the legal fraternity for many years and with good track record. Yeah.
It goes back to, I mean, if you don't like what is reported about you, does it make it fake news? And also the issue that you spoke about having white-owned media and black-owned media. We can have the same story that we have all these journalists at a press conference, but if you read it from one media house, it's a totally different story from what the other media house is talking about. Where do we bridge that gap?
Okay. I think my brother is conflicted, you see, because he's wearing two hats.
I think he's trying to be safe.
He's a lecturer. He's a lecturer, and also he now has to talk on behalf of SANEF.
It's like trying to pull teeth out of him.
Which is very difficult.
Yeah, so it's not working.
I understand the situation that he's in. But let me help him. SANEF is very much compromised. SANEF is very much compromised. There is no editors forum. The ombudsman is a useless tool. Let me tell you why. The Press Council, which obviously oversees the ombudsman, gets its funding from media houses, all of them. They pay them. So they pay salaries. They pay their salaries. They pay their rent. They pay their traveling. They pay their hotel. They pay their existence. SANEF gets its funding from all these media houses, all of them. They give them a certain amount based on how big the newspaper is. So all these media houses pay SANEF salaries, they pay their office, they pay their travel, they pay their existence. Now, how do you expect the ombudsman to deal with the hands that fit him? He can't. That is why people can write damaging stories. We have seen stories in the newspapers where that led to divorce. We have seen stories where people committed suicide because of the stories. I'll make an example of one story, which I don't really want to make an example of. But there was a story that one of the wives of the president had a child by his bodyguard. When this was a story in the media, it was a big story. When the paternity test came, it proved that that was the child of the president. The bodyguard took his life. He committed suicide because of the pressure. Did any media house go to court as a cause for that suicide? No. The ombudsman, all that he can do is write an apology. That's all he does. So white media has structured their regulation, so they are basically regulating themselves. That's self-regulation. We pay you. You cannot recommend that we must be taken to court. You cannot recommend that that family that we wrote about in the shacks where the father ended up killing himself or something happened. You cannot recommend that they must sue us. So the ombudsman is managing the anger of those who are done wrong by the media. So that particular self-regulation does not serve you and me. However, when you go to the courts, which is another one, in the United States, when you sue a media house for, what do they call it? Defamation or whatever, you pay serious money. You pay serious money. But here, you pay lawyers 3 million. And the court says, this media house must pay you 50,000. So when you look at the money I'm going to spend and the money I'm going to get, but sometimes it's not about the money, it's about the principle. I have taken them on in the past, and they have withdrawn the stories that they're going to do.
So all you get is an apology.
So all you get is an apology.
Later.
All you get...
Let's get Sarah to respond to this, but we'll come back to you, Kenny. Reforms in media monitoring, we have... I'll get you to respond to Sanif and, you know, your ethical issues.
No, but I can just be very brief. I think...
No, it's fine. I need Sarah to respond to this first.
So my question, and I know we're not meant to be asking questions, but directed back. So if the Press Council falls away, what would you suggest in its place?
When you go to Ghana, there is a regulation of the media in Ghana. Journalists get a license to be a journalist. Doctors, no, don't say you. Doctors in this country have got a license. Nurses have got a license. Lawyers have got a license. So if a nurse does something wrong to a patient, you go to the nursing council, their license is taken away. They cannot practice. Advocates, lawyers, if a lawyer does something to you, you take him to the law society and they find him guilty. His license is, he gets disbarred. So what makes journalists and the media special for them to not be regulated when they murder people through their stories, when they break families through their stories, when they cause young people to commit suicide through their stories?
Sarah, do you have anything to say? Chamana, you can finalize.
So the suggestion of a government-run media appeals tribunal, is that what you're suggesting? A government-established council? So the government would issue licenses to journalists. And that's the beginning of the end for freedom of expression and the freedom of the media, because the second a journalist writes a story, like Nkandla would never have come up, potentially, if they lost their license because the government issued it. And so there are particular breaking stories that need to be aired separately and apart from the government. And the second we start clamping down on media regulations, especially government-run, we run the risk of going back to apartheid, where the government cancelled out all you'd receive a newspaper and there'd be parts of it that were cancelled out by the government.
It's very rich.
And I'll ask you to stew on that, Kenny. You can respond to after the break.
What is
Sarah,
the
do you want to wrap it up so we can just go
What is the difference between the media appeals tribunal that is government-run and censorship?
Right. Chamana?
No, I mean, Kenny, I think he raised quite a number of issues regarding SANEF, regarding the Press Council. Well, those are his views, and I can only say he's entitled to his views. And obviously, sitting here today, I am not speaking on behalf of the two organizations. I came here as a media expert. I think we need to understand that just for the point of clarity. So, on the issue that Sarah touched on, I think we need to be very, very careful. I mean, it is correct to say there are genuine concerns, right? There are things that do go wrong at times, and we must make that admission, you know, in the media landscape. But to get the media regulated, the journalists getting licenses, as Kenny suggests, I can tell you without any fear of contradiction, for me it's a big no. It's a big no because media plays an important role in a democratic state, and we should allow media to be independent. Media cannot operate like it is the case in some of our neighboring you know, countries here in Africa, and I don't even want to go to those names. Sarah, you should know the issues of what is happening in Zimbabwe, for example. We've seen a total collapse, right? So media, there's absolutely no doubt that it plays a very important role. And she also just gave us another example.
You're watching People's Imbizo. It's time for a very short break. It's getting heated up in here. You at home, of course, can join in the conversation. Remember, the hashtag to use is People's Imbizo. We're coming to you from Tshwane University of Technology. We'll be back in a moment.